Welcome to the Workplace Wellbeing Essential Series. I'm Mari Ryan. I'm the CEO and founder of Advancing Wellness. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to this expert interview where we explore topics that impact employee well-being. My guest today is Dr. Dennis Reina. Dr. Dennis Reina is, along with his life partner and business partner, Dr. Michelle Reina, are sought-after pioneering thought leaders on developing deep engagement, managing change, developing teams, and fostering leadership effectiveness through building trust and sustaining trust. High trust creates environments where people are heard and understood and align around company values to produce business results. As speakers, consultants, workshop leaders, and executive coaches for over 30 years, Dennis and Michelle co-founded Reina, a trust building specializing in measuring, developing, and restoring workplace trust globally. They've co-authored award-winning best-selling books, including The Trust and Betrayal in the Workplace. As you can see, I've got all my little notes on this one, and Rebuilding Trust in the Workplace. Dennis has received numerous awards, including the Global Strategic Leadership Award at the World HRD Congress in Mumbai, India. Dennis, I am so excited to have you here as my guest today.
Well, thank you, Mari. It's such a treat and a pleasure to be with you and, of course, your audience. And I'm so honored to be interviewed by you.
Well, thanks, Dennis. Well, let's just dig into our topic today because I'm fascinated by this topic. So here we are in 2020, which has brought seismic changes to the workplace and how we work. And for many organizations, their workforces are no longer showing up in the workplace on a daily basis. So it's a distributed workforce or people are working from home. So this has brought many changes in how we lead, how we manage, and how we work. And I believe, and I know you certainly do too, and I hope our audience will agree with us, that at the foundation of being able to lead and manage through these times of change is a culture of trust in the workplace. So why don't we start by level setting for our audience? What do you mean when you talk about trust in the workplace? How do you define it?
You know, that's a great question, Mari. Trust is everything. Trust, the health of a business, a culture, and people, there's nothing more essential to that health and vibrancy than trust, because trust is at the core of the human need for connection. And that's ever present. It just will not go away. And trust is also about the little things. You know, it's the dye that colors how we relate to one another. It binds us together and defines successful relationships, not just here in the United States, but worldwide. Trust influences how people show up and talk with one another, how they behave, how we behave, how you behave, how I behave.
Right.
From our 30 years of research at Reina Trust Building, we have found that trust is reciprocal. You got to give it to get it. And it's created incrementally, step by step over time. It's earned. And guess what? There's only one person that can build it or break it. And that's me, and that's you. Because trust begins with me. Trust begins with you. It is about raising our awareness. And it's not a one and done. Trust is a journey because, you know, it's not something we can just check off the list and say, okay, I got trust done, you know, I'm good now. No, it's an ongoing journey. It's work each and every day. But you know what? The benefits are so great. The benefits are so great because trust is, I had mentioned that trust is universal. You know, whether we're in Singapore, whether we're in Europe, whether we're in Africa, Asia, here in the United States, what we have found from our research is that there are three dimensions that define what trust means. First of all, there's trust of character. We do what we say we're going to do. We're clear and realistic in our expectations, and we look out for the best interest of one another. There's also trust of communication. We communicate openly and honestly and transparently. We speak directly with each other when we have an issue or concern. We don't go talking behind their back and gossiping and backbiting. And third, there's trust of capability. Trusted capability is that we acknowledge and leverage both those skills and abilities of one another, and we help them learn new skills to be better citizens of this world.
Well, I love that model, and thank you for sharing your model, which is just such an important part of our conversation here today. I want to go back for a moment to one of the things you said in your opening comments, which I really, really connect to, and that is you said that trust is about who we are as human beings, about that sense of belonging and that sense of connection that we have. And in the model that we use with our clients for well-being in the workplace, one of the elements is connection and how we build those relationships and connections. So I see such a key element to this. But I'm curious from your perspective, how does trust either foster or inhibit well-being, both perhaps of the individual and of the organization?
Well, that's great. Great question, Mari, because trust fosters well-being in actually many ways. For example, when trust is high in a workplace, it's energy producing. People feel good. They're excited. They're excited about who they're working with. They're excited about what they're doing, and they're excited to produce results. Because trust is foundational to the health and vibrancy of any relationship, and it's also fundamental to our own individual well-being. In fact, interesting enough, before I got my doctorate in human and organizational systems, actually I got my first master's in holistic health education, and that was all about studying individual well-being. And this was back in actually 1980, and in the early 80s. Stress management was huge back then. Of course, now it's even
Yeah, here we are today, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when trust is present, there's a feeling like, and it does start with a feeling. It's not a cognitive exercise. Trust starts with a feeling. We can actually feel trust. You can't see it or touch it, but you can feel it. You know when it's there, and you know when it's not there. And so when it's present, there's nothing that we can't do. And people feel heard and understood for who they are and what they do and what they bring to the table. And their views and their relationships and their perspectives, they count. They feel that they make a difference. Yet, on the other hand, when trust is not present or even absent, progress is stalled. Workplaces shut down, or people withdraw within those workplaces, and they withdraw their best efforts. They do as little as they can get away with, and the status quo becomes the norm, and the lowest common denominator sets in. And often in these low trust environments, anxiety and depression are high.
Wow.
Unplanned sick leave is rampant. People's behavior is often erratic. And sleep patterns are even affected. And so trust is not just a nice thing to have. It affects our whole well-being, internally and externally, both as us as individuals and in the workplace.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's really clear the connection. And I noticed in your earlier comments, and then I also noticed right here on the back of your book that you talk about this concept of trust begins with you. So in your comments there, it sounds like this is not just what happens in the workplace. This is kind of an inside job too.
Yes. Well, yes, you're absolutely right, because trust, again, in yourself is at the core of who we are as a person, at the core of who we are. When there's someone who is self-confident, they are often more trusted and more relied upon than someone who has a low sense of trust in themselves and therefore a low sense of confidence.
Mm.
Yes, trust begins with me, trust begins with you, trust begins with each and every one of us. And it's how willing and ready we are to trust that reflects actually our capacity for trust.
Mm.
And if you realize in the model that's in our book, our capacity for trust is at the heart. It's our willingness and our readiness to trust ourselves, which impacts our willingness and our readiness to trust others.
Mm.
And when we see ourselves as trustworthy,
Mm.
and that's a very important word. When we see ourselves as trustworthy, we see ourselves as reliable and dependable and well-intentioned. And when you trust others, you have confidence in their judgment and in their intentions. This developmental predisposition actually starts the day we're born. And those first couple of years in our development as human beings are very critical to the formation of trust and how we trust in ourselves and how we begin to learn to trust in others.
Mm-hmm.
Because the truth is anyone at any level can influence and take action to both build and sustain trust, because trust is reciprocal. You got to give it to get it, and it's created incrementally, step by step over time. And it's through that self-awareness of both what trust means and how it affects our behavior that we really bring this to our relationships, both at work and at home.
Mm.
And it's the conscious choices that we make in how we show up and behave. And what we try to do both in our book and in our model is give people a common language and a shared understanding to not only think about trust, to be able to talk about trust and trust-related issues. So instead of gossiping about so-and-so behind their back, we're able to approach them directly, openly, honestly, and transparently and work through the issues.
Well, that brings to mind this, where we are today. What a year this has been. And, there's just so many things going on that are so disruptive. And we're having to look in organizations for ways to really be able to be agile and respond to the changes that are happening. And I'm just curious, given all of this, chaotic situation that we're in right now and continue to be in, we see no end in sight for some of this. How has this changed the need for trust in the workplace? Has it changed, or is it a dynamic environment right now with the need for trust in the workplace?
Well, I think it's changed drastically, actually. Let me answer that question though by giving you a little bit of background.
Sure.
As I may have mentioned, 30 years ago, Michelle and I actually met on the dance floor in graduate school, and we've been dancing together ever since. And at the time when we started our research on trust building, of course, we were in graduate school studying for our doctorates. And this was 1990. Very few people were talking about trust back then.
Right.
Yes, the importance of it was maybe somewhat understood, but what it meant and how to build it, what are those behaviors that actually are critical, was relatively unknown. So we, being good little graduate students at the time, we went to work, and some of our initial research findings at the time realize that business is conducted through relationships. I mean, it's common knowledge now, but back then, 30 years ago, it wasn't so much common knowledge. And trust is the foundation of those effective relationships. And in fact, trust actually builds that bridge between the business need for results, because let's face it, businesses are in business because they need to produce results. But it also, trust builds that bridge between that business need for results and that human need for connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that bridge is so critical. Now, of course, given the pandemic, the social unrest, the highly charged political environment, and hey, we just had a debate or a debacle the other night. It's interesting that there's so many quote unquote trust experts coming out now of the woodwork, so to speak. But, I said this 30 years ago. Now more than ever, there's a need for trust.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, if that isn't ever so true right now, God help
Yeah.
us, and particularly with people working more remotely.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders, the human need for connection is ever so more.
Right.
Leaders need to trust their people working remotely that they are working. And in fact, there are actually some initial studies are showing that they're actually producing higher results than spending the time commuting back and forth to work. Employees need to trust their leaders that they have their best interest at heart, at mind, and in spirit.
Well, Dennis, that makes me think about how we know when, especially now that it's a more challenging time with people working from home, much more so than they have. How do you know when you're in a workplace or an environment that's high trust versus low trust?
Well, high trust environments, of course, trust is at the core of the human condition, okay? We mentioned that in numerous studies. It's interconnected, it's interrelated. Our model is holistic, it's practical, applicable, and repeatable. And what we know to be true, and for fear of repeating myself, when we have trust in the workplace, it's energy producing. People are excited about what they're doing and who they're working with. And it's foundational to relationships, both at work and at home. And in high trust organizations, work is easier. Work does not suffer. Work is easier. Communication, teamwork, collaboration, change. People go through change more fluidly. People are engaged. Work gets done more easily and without the struggle. Yet the reverse is true. When low trust organizations or it's absent, work and progress is often stalled. Okay. And of course, there's also the physical ramifications of anxiety, depression, anger, erotic behavior, etc. I mean, the truth of the matter is, trust is ever present. Whether it's present or absent, it affects the workplace. When it's present, it positively impacts the workplace. And when it's not, and when it's absent, it negatively inhibits work getting done. Work suffers, and everything becomes harder and more strenuous than ever before.
Really? I suspect that we probably have a lot of people in our audience who might be thinking that, yeah, I probably do work in a low trust workplace, which makes me think about what can employers do other than the obvious answer of hiring you and Michelle to help them create an environment of trust. What can employers do to help move that needle from a low trust environment to a more high trust environment?
Well, first of all, an employer and a leader needs to, first of all, get clear in their own mind and then therefore translate it to their employees of why trust is essential in the first place. And they need to examine the business needs for trust, the cultural needs for trust, and the people needs for trust. In other words, how would having more trust improve the way they do business, the way their culture is manifesting itself, and the way people interact with one another? So they take a look more specifically. Let me give you some examples. Business needs effectiveness, they need efficiency, they need agility, accelerated growth, and competitive advantage. Yet not at odds, but collaborative with that, cultural needs for inclusion, particularly now more than ever with all the social unrest. They need collaboration, embracing ambiguity, stepping into change with more certainty or at least more curiosity than fear. Stepping in with more curiosity than fear, that's an important one. And stepping in to uncertainty and deepening engagement. And then the people needs. People need to engage in meaningful work. They want to know where they spend most of their waking hours makes a difference to someone, somewhere, somehow. They need to know that they make a difference so that when they go home at night, they not only and greet their families, but they can sleep well at night. So the next thing is leaders at work need to conduct a baseline assessment. Analyze where trust stands. Let's face it, trust is too important to be left to blind assumption or guesswork. Leaders need to know where trust stands, and they need to measure trust to equip their leaders with baseline data, because let's face it, leaders love data and they thrive on data. And with the data from our trust measuring assessment, we have a suite of statistically valid and reliable, highly psychometrically sound assessments that measure trust at the leader, team, organization, and customer levels. They need to develop razor sharp focus on what are those behaviors that they're doing that builds trust, that they want to continue and leverage. What are those behaviors that they're vulnerable, that they need to pay attention to, that if they don't pay attention to those, they'll come back and bite them in the butt? And what are those opportunities that they can seize? And really, through evaluating both the tangible and the intangible, measuring it, they can begin to integrate it into the fabric and the culture of their relationships at work. So what they're doing is applying science and rigorous process, okay? Equipping them with data, with our 3 dimensions of trust, and then they deepen each of their own trust building capabilities, okay? I mentioned before that trust was universal. And the leaders need to create this level of safety within the organization so people can begin to talk about the issues. You know, when there's fear in the workplace, people shut down, and they rather than talk to their leaders, they talk to everybody else about their leaders. And that doesn't serve anyone. Trust is an outcome, not an input. And so they need to earn people's trust by listening and understanding what's going on around them, and then put those 3 dimensions to practice, develop their own capacity for trust by not only owning it, but modeling and teaching trust building. You know, you had mentioned one of the things that people can do, the best thing they can do is hiring us. We actually develop capability internally with leaders. Our job is not so much to be the sage on the stage, but our job is to be the guide on the side and really empower those leaders to then take the work, take those trust building principles and take the work and take them throughout their organization. So our goal is to really, if you will, educate those leaders so they can then educate their people.
I love it. And I love this idea of this model that you've got. And you've mentioned it a couple of times. Quickly, if you wouldn't mind, just take us through the 3 dimensions of this model again, because I think this is really important for people to understand, to see how they can leverage this in their work.
Sure. So I mentioned trust of character. We do what we say we're going to do. Trust of character is the starting point of any business relationship, okay? These 3 dimensions work hand in hand, but the starting point of any business relationship is in that trust of character. And part of that, the behaviors, is managing expectations. Do we make the implicit explicit? Do we make what we expect people to do, particularly now working remotely, people are not in the office as they used to be. 42% or more of the US population are working from home. And I think it's actually probably a lot more, but those are some of the latest figures. We need to make sure that people are clear of what's expected of them. And then we as leaders and they as employees need to deliver as promised. We need to really own and walk our talk and keep our word and deliver as we have promised and look out for the best interest. We call this encouraging mutually serving intentions and actions.
Mm-hmm.
I've got your back, you've got my back. We're in this together. And then, of course, keeping our agreements, as I mentioned, and being consistent. Consistency builds predictability. Predictability builds trust. So that's trust of character. Then trusted communication. We're open, honest, and transparent of how we communicate with one another. We speak directly with individuals rather than gossiping or backbiting behind their back. And we work through the issues and concerns collectively. And we help people learn, give each other, learn and grow by giving each other feedback, okay? And this creates an environment not only of transparency, as I mentioned, but also of collaboration for growth and development of the organization. And that's trust of communication. And then thirdly, trust of capability. We acknowledge and leverage each other's skills and abilities, and we're inclusive of their points of view, of their perspectives, of their talents, of their wisdom. And we seek their input. We involve them in decisions that affect their jobs and their lives. And we help one another learn and grow, because let's face it, if we are in fact going to grow the bench, we're not going to hire it from outside. We're going to grow it from internally for the most part. And that's where we need to help people learn new skills so they grow in themselves, not only for the job, but they grow as people. These three dimensions are interrelated, they work hand in hand, and they are there to support you.
Well, they just make such perfect sense. And I'm so glad you took a moment to just take us through that in a little bit more detail. It's fascinating. And I can see how all of your many years of research and experience in working with organizations to make this effective has really, really shines in that model.
Well,
Dennis, if our audience wants to learn more about you and the work that you and Michelle are doing, where can they find you?
Well, they can find us at Reina Trust Building. That's www.reinatrustbuilding.com.
Fabulous.
And thank you so much, Mari, because I get very passionate about this. While I've been doing it for 30 years, I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm very excited, but in a very thoughtful and purposeful way, but I also get very excited talking about our work because it does make a difference. It makes a difference with you. It makes a difference with me. It makes a difference for all of our listening audience.
It does. And thank you so much for your passion and for the great work that you and Michelle have been doing all over the world for so many years now. You're creating a better place and a better world because of your work. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mari.